What's up, Raider Nation? Welcome to TRU RAIDER Podcast. I'm your host, TRU RAIDER. Now, what I want to talk about in today's video is what is going to be happening with our head coach moving forward. Now, there was this really interesting question that came up during the post-game press conference after the Raiders beat the Saints, where, they asked, there's been a lot of speculation about your future here. Are your players making a statement? And Antonio Pierce says, I got no comment on that. And the way that he said it, he really, and I keep talking about how Antonio Pierce, he has no poker face. He wears his emotions on his sleeve. It's very obvious when he's feeling some type of way. And it was very, very clear that he has very strong feelings about that question and about what that actually means for him. Now, this is a very confusing situation because right now, because the Raiders beat the Jaguars and the Raiders beat the Saints, they moved down from contention for the number one overall pick. And if they had just lost these two games, the Giants won against the Colts, we'd be sitting at number one. So because we won these two games, right now we're sitting at pick number 8. And that means a lot of things for the Raiders right now. For one, that means that we do not have our pick of the litter when it comes to the draft. And so there's a very high possibility that we either cannot draft one of the top quarterbacks, either Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, or we're in a position where the Raiders end up trading draft capital away to move up for something that they could have had for free. Now, that really bothers me a lot. Another thing is that there's all these rumors about that Antonio Pierce is not going to be the head coach for next year. There's been rumors about Mike Vrabel. There's a lot of reports coming out of this speculation. And honestly, I feel like because the Raiders are winning right now, for one, it gives Aiden O'Connell a better chance at competing for the QB1 position next year. Whether that's good, bad, or however you feel about it, that's just the reality. And then it also kind of gives Antonio Pierce a better shot on keeping his job. And not because, he's winning these games and he's a good coach. It's more of that it's putting us in a position where another head coach isn't really going to see this as a very attractive landing spot, because another head coach comes in and they're going to have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew as their quarterbacks on the roster. They're going to be in position where they either have to roll forward with them or trade up in the draft, unless maybe, the Raiders really have their sights on a quarterback in the second or third round. Another option is that a lot of people are speculating that Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, either one, could fall, out of the top 10. And if that's the case, we might still be in position to draft them. But I don't really think that that's going to be what it is. There's some very QB needy teams. And even if it's an overdraft or whatever it may be, people want to get a quarterback. And so they'll go ahead and draft them high, even though they're not really rated to be that high of quarterbacks. So, and when it comes to trading up, right now the speculation on what it might cost to move up would be the 2025 Raiders first, second, and third round pick, and then the 2026 first and second, and a player like Colton Miller or somebody like that to be able to move up to that number one spot. And it really bothers me, the idea of potentially having to spend a lot to get something that we could have had for free. And I get it, right? Like, tanking's illegal, tanking's frowned on, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, all they had to do was just sit Aiden O'Connell and start Desmond Ridder, and it could be chalked up as bad coaching decision, right? But that's not what they wanted to do. And I think that there's a lot of things that are going on right now where, if Antonio Pierce is not feeling very comfortable in his position as a head coach for the Raiders, it makes sense for him to want to win some games at the end of the season, right? He wants to win some games because if he's not going to have a job here, well, it gives him better leverage to maybe get a job somewhere else. But also, it does put him in a better position to end up being the Raiders head coach for next year. He was asked a question about coaching, and him being with the team a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I'm under contract. So he's under contract, and I believe he has one more year on his contract. They haven't really released it, but there's been some rumors. And since he has one more year on his contract, at least, it kind of makes sense if you're Mark Davis and you don't have a prospect like a Mike Vrabel or a Ben Johnson or one of these big name head coaches that we might be able to bring in. If those guys really aren't interested, because let's face it, the Raiders are probably not going to have a quarterback. There's other teams, that are more sought after right now for new head coaches, or head coaches that are coming back. Teams like the Bears, or even the Giants, or even the Patriots. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. And then if you look at Vegas, and it's like, okay, they're picking at number 8 overall, and they have Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. It's going to be difficult. There's a lot of cap space, and there's some advantages, and there's no state tax and all that stuff. But what it comes down to is that we're not really going to be a sought-after destination for head coaches, which means that Antonio Pierce is pretty likely to retain his job. Now, if Antonio Pierce does retain his job, I'm not really upset about it. If we can upgrade, of course I want to upgrade, right? And that counts for everybody. Everybody. Nobody is above the shield, right? But right now, what it really, really looks like, and this just could be the Monday after winning a game that honestly I felt pretty salty about us winning that game. It could just me having some kind of feelings about that and being in a position where it's like, I don't know, man. I think that there's a good possibility that we end up with Antonio Pierce as our head coach next year, and there's a good possibility that Aiden O'Connell is going to be having a quarterback competition with maybe a second or third round rookie to be the starter for next season. Now, a lot of people right now are saying, oh, Aiden O'Connell's playing great. We should just stick with him. Let's build around him. And I do believe that Aiden O'Connell can have a lot of upside, especially if during the offseason he were to work with Tom Brady. There was a lot of speculation that Tom Brady would be, if we drafted Shedeur Sanders, that he'd be working with him during the offseason and stuff like that. And if he did that same thing with Aiden O'Connell, I believe that he could clean up his game quite a bit. And Aiden O'Connell has decent upside. But let's face it, the teams that we just beat, and the Jaguars and the Saints, are awful teams. And not only are they awful teams, but both teams were playing a backup quarterback. Now, the difficult part with what's going on with Aiden O'Connell is that right now he is 6-1 against backup quarterbacks. And against starters, he's 1-8. So those aren't great numbers. Those are not great numbers at all. And while I like Aiden O'Connell, I don't picture him as somebody who's really a future franchise guy. I would love for him to prove me wrong. I would love for him to have a great offseason and come in next year just, slinging the ball and just looking amazing. I would love that, especially if we, built up the offensive line a little bit, maybe gave him a good running back, maybe a real wide receiver 1. Then all of a sudden that conversation could change, right? But as of right now, while I like Aiden O'Connell, I do not believe that he is somebody that can take us to a Super Bowl. I do not believe that instantly Aiden O'Connell being a starter from day one is going to take us to the playoffs. I don't believe that. And if, a lot of people are saying, well, just us getting a quarterback doesn't really mean all that and that we're going to do all these things. If you look at the Commanders had the number 2 overall pick last draft. And they just secured a spot in the playoffs because they secured Jaden Daniels and they got a good offensive coordinator. And then that's another piece of this, right? Is that Mike Vrabel while people were really thinking he's the ideal candidate, he was very dependent on offensive coordinators. And really, we're at a spot where so was Antonio Pierce. Now, I don't know if Scott and Norv Turner are going to be our offensive coordinators next year or not, or what that's really going to look like. I don't know if we can find another offensive coordinator who's going to do great. I don't see a whole lot of offensive coordinators that are really up and coming in their career looking at the Raiders and seeing Aiden O'Connell as the starter and saying, you know what, that's where I want to go leave my mark. That's where I want to go build my career. I don't see that being a thing. So it's a rough position for us, you guys. It's definitely a rough position. I do believe that Tom Telesco, even if we're drafting at number 8 or number 9, that he's going to probably go best player available, and he's probably going to pick up some pretty good players. I mean, if you look at Brock Bowers just set several records yesterday, as a rookie tight end. He's most receiving yards by a rookie tight end. He set the record for most receptions by a rookie, and not just tight ends, just a rookie. And then he also set the Raiders' all-time receptions record, beating Darren Waller. So he's already shown us with Brock Bowers and JPJ with Jackson Powers Johnson that Tom Telesco is, he's pretty good at drafting, right? Or at least so far it looks pretty good. And so I do have some hope that he's going to come in this next draft and he's going to pick up some good players and we're going to be building this team. It's just really hard to think about picking up these best player available when we do not have a quarterback. I would have loved for us to be in a position to where we draft a quarterback right away in the first round. We get to have our pick, whatever one that they want, and then do best player available after that. So you guys let me know what you think about in the comments. Will Antonio Pierce be our head coach next year? And do you believe that Aiden O'Connell will be in a position next year where he's also having a quarterback battle just like this last season for that starting job? Like always, I love you, nation. I'll catch you on the next one.